On a winter night in 1972, inside a Soviet radar bunker near Moscow, sirens tore through the concrete, screens blinked, and seasoned officers stared in confusion. A single radar blip raced across the display, moving at 3,529 kilometers per hour at 85,000 feet, and for a long beat, the operators believed the system was broken. Jokes about arrogant American toys dissolved as Colonel Anatoly Krupnov watched his instruments and the room went very quiet. Then the dread arrived. No Soviet pilot, no MiG, no missile could catch what the Soviets would come to call the SR-71, the Blackbird. In those next silent seconds, the Kremlin's confidence cracked. What happened there rewrote the rules of the Cold War, and few in the West ever learned how deeply it shook the Soviet command. Laughter echoed through the bunker, bouncing off concrete walls and tangled wires. A young radar operator, barely old enough to shave, pointed at the glowing streak on his screen. He smirked, "Amerikanskie igrushki." Someone else laughed. Maybe the Americans finally built a flying saucer. The console chief, chewing on a pencil, shrugged. "Probably a weather balloon with a jet engine," he said, and a round of snickers followed. Jokes flew as fast as the blip itself. Someone mimicked an American accent. "Look, comrades, I go vroom." Even the senior lieutenant, eyes fixed on the scope, could not resist. "Let them have their fun. Our MiG-25s will make quick work of this one." One operator, tapping the glass, muttered, "The machine is drunk again. Nothing moves that fast." Another wagered a pack of cigarettes it would vanish in seconds, just another ghost in the system. The mood was light, almost festive, a rare break from the usual tension. "If it is real, I will eat my cap," someone called out, drawing a chorus of mock applause. But as the numbers refused to drop, the jokes began to falter. The senior lieutenant's smile faded. "Check the calibration," he ordered, voice suddenly sharp. The laughter thinned, replaced by uneasy glances. The blip kept moving, unbothered by Soviet pride or missile batteries. In that bunker, confidence hung by a thread, stretched to breaking by an American shadow racing at the edge of the possible. A heavy door slammed somewhere above, cutting through the last nervous laugh. The main console's clock read 02:13:27, red digits flickering in the gloom. All eyes shot to the center of the room as Chief Radar Officer Anatoly Krupnov stepped forward, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. A hush fell, total silence. Krupnov's voice cut the tension like a blade. He said, "Verify all instruments. Double-check the calibration. No one leaves their post." The single command, "verify," snapped the operators into motion. Operators scrambled to obey, hands shaking as they recalibrated dials and rechecked connections. The faint hum of vacuum tubes filled the silence. Krupnov's gaze swept the consoles, searching for any sign of malfunction, but the numbers stayed the same. Altitude, 85,000 feet. Speed, Mach 3.2. No Soviet aircraft, not even the MiG-25, could match those figures, and the word impossible hung in the air. The banter vanished, replaced by a cold, collective dread. One operator, voice barely above a whisper, read the data aloud. Confirmed. Target speed holding, no deviation. That confirmation reverberated through the room like a verdict. Krupnov leaned over the plotting table, his knuckles white. He ordered a full system diagnostic. The room fell into a tense 30-second hush, every second marked by the relentless sweep of the radar. The blip kept moving, slicing across the Moscow defense grid, indifferent to the ring of missile batteries and interceptor squadrons below. No one spoke. The only sound was the low whir of the tracking scope and the distant pulse of the alarm. Krupnov's logbook would later record the time, the readings, and the moment the joke stopped. In that bunker, under the weight of those impossible numbers, the old certainties of Soviet air power began to crack. Low electronics and distant desert wind. In a locked hangar at the edge of Groom Lake, a handful of engineers gathered around blueprints stained with fingerprints and coffee. Clarence Kelly Johnson, known as Kelly Johnson, the man behind Skunk Works, tapped a pencil against the table. He told his team, "If they can see us, we have failed." The mandate was simple: build an aircraft faster and higher than anything the world had ever seen, and do it under a veil of absolute secrecy. Every detail mattered. The airframe would be forged from titanium, a metal so rare in the United States that procurement teams under CIA cover quietly sourced it from the Soviet Union itself. Internal memos from Lockheed in Burbank warned of the risks, extreme compartmentalization required, no disclosure of end use. The irony was plain. Soviet ore would become the skin of the Blackbird. Titanium made secrecy possible. Engineers faced problems no textbook could solve. At Mach 3.2, friction would heat the skin to over 600 degrees Celsius. Panels would expand, stretching the airframe by several inches in flight. On the ground, SR-71 leaked fuel from every seam. Maintenance logs called it the leak bird, but Johnson insisted, if it does not leak, it is not ready to fly. The reality of heat and expansion rewrote every assumption about high-speed structures. The propulsion challenge was as daunting as the structure. Pratt and Whitney J58 engines, with their translating spikes, were designed to move from turbojet mode toward a near ramjet as speed increased. Onboard analog computers managed airflow, shifting the spikes up to 26 inches to keep shockwaves in check. Any glitch could trigger an unstart, an abrupt and violent loss of thrust. Test pilots learned a new language of emergency handling. One pilot later said, "You did not fly the Blackbird, you negotiated with it." The word unstart haunted every sortie. A pause for breath, then the first flight. On December 22nd, 1964, the prototype taxied onto the runway at Area 51. The desert air shimmered with heat. At 8:56 a.m., SR-71 lifted off, its titanium frame gleaming under the Nevada sun. Data recorders captured every vibration, every surge of thrust. In the control room, Kelly Johnson watched the telemetry with a rare smile. "We built a plane the world had never seen and has never seen since." This moment confirmed that American engineering, working in the shadows, could bend the rules of flight and keep its secrets. That first flight was more than a technical milestone. It was proof of audacity, of secrecy, and of an engine of intelligence that would change the balance of information in the Cold War. The design mandate had been fulfilled, but the true test and the world it would force to react lay ahead. Shipments left the docks in Rotterdam and Hamburg under names like Third Country Metals and Global Industrial Resources. On paper, the cargo was bound for Swiss machine shops or Italian chemical plants. In reality, the crates held Soviet titanium ore destined for a secret assembly line in Burbank, California. Each invoice, stamped with a layer of bureaucratic fog, hid the metal's true origin from both Soviet customs and American regulators. On-screen map shows route from Rotterdam and Hamburg to Burbank, California. Lockheed procurement officers, working in tandem with CIA handlers, built a spider web of front companies to shield the operation. Bank wires snaked through Luxembourg, Cyprus, and Panama. Freight manifests listed false end users, while the actual destination was a warehouse just off the Pacific Coast Highway. Internal memos from the Directorate of Science and Technology warned of the stakes. They said exposure would compromise both program and national security, and that absolute compartmentalization was required. The irony burned hotter than the Blackbird's skin at Mach 3.2. Soviet miners paid in rubles never guessed that their labor would cloak an American spy plane. Each shipment crossed borders under layers of forged signatures, export certificates, and insurance policies. One batch, traced in a declassified CIA procurement summary, traveled from a Ukrainian smelter to a Belgian distributor, then on to a nondescript Los Angeles freight yard. Every step was watched by agents on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Customs officials sometimes asked questions, a bribe here, a forged customs stamp there, and the containers kept moving. When Soviet trade officials inquired about soaring titanium exports to the West, they received bland reassurances that the shipments were for aeronautical research and industrial parts, and nothing unusual. The truth was buried in a maze of paperwork and false trails. By the time the titanium reached Skunk Works, engineers joked that the only thing more secret than the Blackbird's design was how they got the metal. In a world where a single slip could spark an international incident, every bolt on the SR-71's frame carried the weight of 1,000 lies. The Cold War, fought in shadows and silence, had turned Soviet ore into the armor of America's most elusive weapon. Thin haze of cigarette smoke hung in the Oval Office as President Lyndon B. Johnson listened to the latest CIA briefing. A stack of classified folders stamped with the code names Giant Scale and Senior Crown sat unopened on the table. Silence and tension filled the room. CIA Director Richard Helms spoke first, voice measured, eyes fixed on the president. He said, "Mr. President, the intelligence gap is growing. Satellite coverage is patchy. We are blind to Soviet missile deployments east of the Urals." Johnson tapped his pen against his diary. The pages were already filled with notes from previous crises: the Bay of Pigs, the U-2 incident, the Cuban Missile Gambit. The memory of Francis Gary Power's capture and the diplomatic firestorm that followed lingered in every decision. The word intelligence hung in the air. Nearby, Kelly Johnson's technical summary lay open, language blunt and exact. Mach 3.2, 85,000 feet. Radar signature reduced by 90%. No known interceptor or missile can reach it. The report named the Blackbird directly, and its promise was clear, and so was the peril. Advisors argued across the table. One warned, a single Blackbird down over Moscow, and we are in a new crisis. Another replied, without these flights, we are flying blind. The debate was fierce. The notion of risk weighed on every face in the room. Late into the evening, the argument continued. Johnson's diary entry for January 10, 1966 later recorded, "We must know what they are building, cannot risk another surprise, but must not provoke outright war." The president felt the stakes were both personal and political. Helms pressed the strategic point. He said, "The Soviets are boasting about their MiG-25. Their propaganda calls our technology obsolete. This is our answer." The room understood the psychological pressure this program would place on the Politburo and on Soviet air defense. In the end, Johnson reached for his pen and signed the order for operational deployment. January 1966. The SR-71 would fly from Beale Air Force Base under the tightest secrecy. Every sortie would be plausibly deniable, and every mission briefed in person. The Blackbird's shadow would cross Soviet skies not as a provocation, but as a silent warning. Falls to a low pulse. Contextual maps, diagrams, and declassified memorandum titles appear. The balance of risk had shifted, and the Cold War entered a new phase, measured in altitude, in speed, and in the silent tension between two men in rival capitals. Colonel Viktor Belenko remembered the swagger that filled Soviet airfields in the late 1960s. MiG-25 pilots strutted across the tarmac, flight suits crisp, convinced they flew the fastest machines on Earth. In classrooms and ready rooms, instructors hammered home the same message. Soviet engineering stood unmatched. The MiG-25, with its twin Tumansky engines and radar nose, was hailed as the West's worst nightmare. Posters in squadron halls showed American bombers in crosshairs, and pilots traded stories of intercepts that ended in triumph, at least on paper. But Belenko, who would later defect and reveal the truth to United States intelligence, described a different atmosphere behind closed doors. "We joked about the Americans and their toy planes," he told his debriefers, but when the SR-71 appeared, the jokes felt thin. On the surface, bravado ruled. Pilots bet vodka on who would be first to down a Blackbird, and maintenance crews painted kill marks on ordnance carts. Yet everyone watched the radar screens with a knot in their stomach. The MiG-25 could reach Mach 2.8 for brief bursts at the edge of structural safety. The Blackbird cruised at Mach 3.2, high above, out of reach. That performance was not rumor. It was a technical reality that erased the margin pilots had always relied on. Bravado endured in public, but private doubt spread quickly. Official briefings dismissed United States claims as propaganda. State television aired segments ridiculing United States technology, and flight manuals described the SR-71 as a high-speed reconnaissance aircraft of limited threat. In the ready rooms, however, pilots whispered about failed intercepts and missiles that never found their target. The reality gnawed at them. The MiG-25 was a lion in propaganda, a kitten against the Blackbird, Malenko confessed. We would joke, but when the Blip vanished, we knew nothing could touch it. That split between public confidence and private doubt ran through the entire Soviet air defense force. On parade days, generals boasted of invincibility. On alert nights, as the radar tracked a streak at impossible speed, even the boldest pilot felt the chill of helplessness. The bravado faded, replaced by a question no one dared voice. What good was all this power if it could not reach the enemy? Inside the nacelles of the Blackbird, the Pratt & Whitney J58 engines roared with a sound unlike any other machine on Earth. Each engine, a 32,500-pound thrust behemoth, was more than a turbojet. It was a shapeshifter. At low speeds, the J58 operated as a conventional afterburning turbojet. But once the SR-71 pierced past Mach 2.5, the engine's true genius revealed itself. Analog computers wired into every sensor and actuator moved the conical inlet spikes up to 26 inches back, adjusting the shockwaves that battered the air at 3 times the speed of sound. Bypass ducts, hidden within the nacelle, channeled up to 20% of the incoming air around the compressor, feeding it directly into the afterburner. That hybrid approach let the engine transition toward ramjet behavior, burning fuel in a torrent of superheated air. The result was sustained cruise at Mach 3.2, with the aircraft riding a cushion of shockwaves at 85,000 feet. Any misstep, an inlet spike out of sync, or a bleed valve stuck, could trigger an unstart, a sudden loss of power that slammed pilots against their harnesses. Test logs are filled with terse entries that read unstart at Mach 3.1, spike reset, recovery achieved. For the men in the cockpit, every flight was a negotiation with physics. The engines alone were not enough. The Blackbird demanded a fuel that could survive the inferno. Standard jet fuel would vaporize or ignite inside the SR-71's blazing hot tanks. Engineers turned to JP7, a custom blend with a flash point above 140 degrees Celsius. On the ground, it was so inert a crew member could stub out a cigarette in a puddle of it. In flight, JP7 doubled as coolant, snaking through heat exchangers to keep avionics, hydraulics, and even the cockpit from melting. Only triethylborane, a green pyrophoric liquid, could ignite it. Each engine carried just 16 shots of TEB. Pilots counted them carefully, because a failed relight could mean a dead engine at the edge of the stratosphere. The entire system, engines, spikes, fuel, and computers, worked in a delicate dance. Maintenance crews pored over technical manuals, checking spike actuators and bleed valves, logging every minute of engine time. The Blackbird's power plant was not just about brute force, it was about precision, chemistry, and the relentless pursuit of speed. At full throttle, the J58 engines left a trail of sonic booms and confusion behind. Their exhaust glowed white-hot as the SR-71 shot across the sky, untouchable by anything the Soviet Union could throw at it. The secret to the Blackbird's invincibility began with its shape. From nose to tail, the SR-71 looked nothing like the fighters or bombers that filled Soviet intelligence files. Instead of a rounded fuselage, Lockheed engineers drew sharp angular Chinese, knife-edged surfaces running the length of the cockpit and blending into the wings. These were not just for show. Each angle, each facet was calculated to scatter radar waves, not reflect them. Where a conventional aircraft bounced signals straight back to enemy receivers, the Blackbird's geometry broke up returns and sent most radar energy harmlessly into the sky. At 85,000 feet, the SR-71 soared above the effective range of most Soviet radars. But even when caught in a tracking beam, its signature was a ghost, reduced by up to 90% compared to a standard jet. Soviet missile operators trained to lock on to the solid echoes of bombers or reconnaissance planes found only a faint shifting trace. Radar screens that would light up with a lumbering Tu-95 showed little more than a flicker as the Blackbird streaked past. Material science played its part. The aircraft's skin, forged from titanium, was coated in a black ferrite-infused paint. This finish did not just dissipate heat from the relentless friction of Mach 3.2 flight, it absorbed and weakened incoming radar pulses. The combination of shape and surface made the Blackbird the first operational aircraft designed for stealth, decades before the word entered military vocabulary. Soviet engineers reviewing after-action logs struggled to explain why their missile systems failed. The S-75 and S-200 batteries, so effective against slower targets, could not track the SR-71 long enough to guide a warhead. The radar cross-section was simply too small, the altitude too high, and the speed too great. Reports sent to General Pavel Kutakov and Marshal Sergei Beryuzov described chronic loss of lock and target fading at apex. In practice, this meant missile seekers went blind just as the Blackbird entered their lethal envelope. Every overflight was a demonstration of geometry as defense. The SR-71 did not just outrun its pursuers, it slipped through the Soviet air defense network, leaving only confusion and a vanishing trace on the scope. The lesson was clear. In the new era of reconnaissance, survival belonged to those who could be seen the least and move the fastest. Experts narrate technical diagrams of Chinese cross-section reduction and heat management, while satellite imagery and radar animations underscore the point that seeing less was the most effective defense. A sweep of radar screens stretched from the Barents Sea to the outskirts of Moscow, each node a link in the Soviet early warning chain. At 2:14 in the morning, a single blip crossed into the Murmansk sector, a frozen corridor bristling with long-range P-14 radars. Operators logged the contact, and the numbers were unsettling. Mach 3.2, altitude above 85,000 feet. The initial handoff was routine. Murmansk relayed the contact south to Chelyabinsk 40, and the radar arc tightened as the corridor narrowed toward the capital. Chelyabinsk 40 consoles flickered with coded alerts. The handoff protocol demanded confirmation from 2 independent stations before escalation. Within seconds, the blip was confirmed by Kamchatka tracking stations, their beams slicing through polar static. A coded burst ran down the line. Operator report, target verified, speed and altitude abnormal, possible system malfunction. The numbers held steady. As the target crossed into the Moscow defense sector, the A-135 anti-ballistic missile ring came online. Operators at the central bunker watched the track approach the outer perimeter, moving too fast for standard engagement sequences. The handoff chain scrolled across screens in real time. Murmansk to Chelyabinsk, Chelyabinsk to Moscow, each node stamping the logbook with a timestamp and a growing sense of urgency. At Ramenskoye Air Base, scramble orders crackled over the intercom. MiG-25 crews sprinted to their aircraft, vectors relayed from Central Command. A wall-sized map marked the flight path, a red string tracing the arc from the northwest border towards the heart of Soviet airspace. Each radar station checked in, confirming the target's impossible speed and unwavering course. In the PVO Strani command bunker, the chain of command snapped into action. Marshal Biryuzov's liaison demanded a full intercept protocol. The chief at Chelyabinsk 40 radioed the recommendation for immediate engagement, and every calculation returned the same result. The intruder would pass through the defense envelope before any missile could reach it. The logs from that night read like a relay race against physics. Each sector handed off the track, each plotted vector confirming the same bleak conclusion: no Soviet weapon could close the gap. The Blip moved from one sector to the next, untouched and untouchable, leaving behind a trail of stamped logs and shaken operators. Labels mark Murmansk, Chelyabinsk 40, Ramenskoye, and the central bunker. Ambient narration notes the invisible line this contact carved across the Soviet map. More than a flight route, it was a line of demarcation between what the air defense network could see and what it could never touch. On-screen map shows Ramenskoye, the Moscow air defense ring, and the projected Blackbird track. The scramble order thundered through Ramenskoye's ready room, and alarm was instant. MiG-25 pilots sprinted for their jets, boots slapping concrete, as ground crews yanked off intake covers and slammed canopies shut. Engines screamed to life, fire licking from exhausts. The intercept vectors were called out, bearing, altitude, speed. Each number sounded more impossible than the last. In the command bunker, Anatoly Krupnov's voice came through, clipped and urgent. Engage, weapons free. On the radar, the Blip cut a perfect arc toward Moscow, holding at Mach 3.2, 85,000 feet. The MiG-25s clawed for altitude, afterburners blazing, but their speed tapes froze at Mach 2.8, engines straining at the red line. Negative intercept, target above maximum ceiling. Soviet S-75 and S-200 missile crews tracked the intruder as it flashed through their engagement zones. Launch commands were issued, boosters ignited, and white contrails curled skyward. Guidance officers counted off the seconds, eyes glued to the screens. Locks flickered, then vanished. Missiles soared past the predicted intercept point, fuses detonating in empty air. The logbooks filled with terse entries. No lock, target faded, detonation at altitude. No lock became the bleak repeated note. Inside the Blackbird, Major Brian Schul and Lieutenant Colonel Walter Watson listened to the threat receiver's chirp. Schul later wrote, "There goes another one." You'd hear the missile warning, feel the engine surge as we pushed for just a little more speed, and then nothing. The tone would die. The missile was gone. Watson's voice on the cockpit recorder was steady. Mach 3.2 and climbing. They can't touch us. Declassified CIA and KGB memoranda would later confirm the sequence, and PVO Strani records would later show over 4,000 missile launches at the SR-71 across its career. None ever found their mark. Pilots and radar crews stared at the empty scopes, the earlier laughter replaced by silence, and the slow realization that their best weapons were useless. The Blackbird's contrail faded into the dawn, leaving behind unanswered questions and a line in the logbook. Target escaped, no intercept possible. Sirens wail, screens glow. In a windowless command room beneath Moscow, technicians call for recalibration, then fall silent. A single blip crossed the perimeter hours earlier, and now the reports arrive in a steady, terrible stream. The target held speed and altitude. No successful intercept. All guidance locks lost at apex. The mood is stern and hollow. Marshal Sergei Biryuzov stands, eyes on a stack of freshly decoded cables. Beside him, General Pavel Kutakov and KGB Chairman Yuri Andropov read after-action summaries in silence. The heading on a couriered memorandum is stark: effectiveness of air defense systems against high-speed targets. The summary is blunt. At maximum gain, Soviet radar cannot hold a lock on this intruder. Missiles detonate harmlessly at altitude. Interceptor pilots report visual contact, then watch the target climb and vanish into the stratosphere. An analyst voice reads aloud key lines from declassified cables and KGB memorandums. The language is clinical, and the implication is not. The capital was watched, and their best systems had failed. Expert commentary, calm and exact. The room remembers doctrine. Our entire doctrine is built on interception, Biryuzov says, and if we cannot intercept, we cannot defend. Kutakov, who once promised the Politburo the MiG-25 would be the equal of any American plane, runs a hand over his face. We have spent years and billions of rubles, he says, yet the Americans fly where they please. The words hang like a verdict. Sound design, distant footsteps, and the whisper of paper. Andropov reads the KGB analysis aloud. The adversary's reconnaissance aircraft demonstrates technical superiority beyond present countermeasures. Immediate review of air defense procurement and research priorities is recommended. The recommendation is a quiet alarm, a summons to change an entire program. A beat of silence. Outside, the corridors bustle with aides and secretaries, but inside the room, the realization presses down. Boast of airspace sovereignty has been pierced. Interceptor pilots had visual contact. They had watched an aircraft climb past ceiling limits and then vanish at speeds that left missile seekers behind. A later interview, recorded after the fall of the USSR, captures the mixture of bitterness and reluctant respect. One officer stated simply, "We never had a plane that could catch it." That sentence, plain and final, becomes a refrain in subsequent budget requests and frantic technical studies. The day the Blackbird crossed Moscow's defenses, the illusion of impenetrability was gone. The word that repeats in declassified assessments is undoubted. On screen, archival imagery shifts from radar animations to satellite stills of the Chelyabinsk 40 complex and the Moscow air defense ring. Labels annotate tracking gaps, and a timeline of missile launches shows thousands of futile alerts. Declassified CIA and KGB memorandum titles are cited by name. Analysts read fragments, and a map of Ramenskoye Air Base to Beale Air Force Base tracks the flow of intelligence and denial. Deep expert commentary explains why this mattered. The Blackbird's design, its materials, and its operating envelope forced a strategic rethink. For men who spent their careers building walls of steel and radar, it was a reckoning. The room understands finally that speed plus altitude had become a new kind of armor, and that procurement and research priorities would have to change to face this reality. As the meeting adjourns, someone pencils a margin line on the KGB memo that will become chilling in hindsight. If they can see everything, we can hide nothing. That sentence, written in a cramped hand, marks the moment the Politburo recognized that surveillance had shifted the balance of vulnerability. The men leave the room. The camera lingers on the empty table and the stack of decoded cables. The realization is not merely technical. It is political, psychological, and irreversible. The Blackbird had not only penetrated airspace, it had punctured an idea. The Soviet Union's sense of impenetrability would never be the same. Today, the world's most advanced surveillance drones and hypersonic platforms still chase the edge first, carved by the SR-71. In an era of unseen wars and invisible borders, the lesson endures. Technological supremacy exposes every secret, and it also breeds new uncertainty. The sky remains a battlefield, measured not just in speed, but in the power to know what we cannot catch, we still fear. Share your perspective below.